Morning, dear students. Now, after a long discussion of the paper second, now we would like to discuss about British novel, that is the paper number third. And in this paper, actually, we would like to start from the block number one. And you see, as soon as we start the block number one, Henry Fielding, the very important name that appears actually in the block number one. Henry Fielding, who was a very famous novelist as a matter of fact, was born on 22nd of April 1707 and he was died on 8th October 1754. He was an English novelist and dramatist known for his rich earthly humor and satirical prowess, and as the author of the novel Tom Jones. So he is very famously known for, you see, his novel Tom Jones. Aside from his literary achievements, he has a significant place in the history of law enforcement, having founded with his half-brother John what some have called London's first police force, the Bow Street Runners, using his authority as a magistrate. So, as we were talking, my dear friends, Henry Fielding is very famously known for his, you see, novel writing and particularly for Tom Jones. Fielding was born at, you see, Sharpham and was educated at Eton College, where he established a lifelong friendship with William Pitt, the elder. After a romantic episode with a young woman that ended in his getting into trouble with the law, he went to London where his literary career began. In 1728, he traveled to Leiden to study classics and law at the university. However, due to lack of money, he was obliged to return to London and he began writing for the theatre. Some of his work being severely critical of contemporary government under Sir Robert Walpole. So he actually developed a kind of friendship with William Pitt. The Theatrical Licensing Act of 1737 is alleged to be a direct response to his activities. The particular play that triggered the Licensing Act was the Golden Rump, but Fielding's satires had set the tone. Once the Licensing Act passed, political satire on the stage was virtually impossible, and playwrights whose works were staged were viewed as suspect. Fielding therefore retired from the theatre and resumed his career in law, and in order to support his wife, Charlotte, and two children, he became a barrister. His lack of financial sense meant that he and his family often endured periods of poverty because he did not have much sense for financial implications. But he was helped by Ralph Allen, a wealthy benefactor who later formed the basis of his Squire Elworthy in Tom Jones. After Fielding's death, Allen provided for the education and support of his children. Fielding never stopped writing political satire and satires of current arts and letters. The Tragedy of Tragedies, for which Hogarth designed the frontispiece, was, for example, quite successful as a printed play. He also contributed a number of works to journals of the day. He wrote for Tory periodicals, usually under the name of Captain Hercules Vinegar, during the late 1730s and early 1740s. Fielding continued to air his liberal and anti-Jacobite views in satirical articles and newspapers. Almost by accident, in anger at the success of Samuel Richardson's Pamela or Virtue Barded, Fielding took to writing novels in 1741, and his first major success was Shamela, an anonymous parody of Richardson's melodramatic novel. It is a satire that follows the model of the famous Tory satirists of the previous generation, Jonathan Swift and John Gay in particular. He followed this with Joseph Andrews, an original work supposedly dealing with Pamela's brother Joseph. Although began as a parody, this work developed into an accomplished novel in its own right and is considered to mark Fielding's debut as a serious novelist. In 1743, he published a novel in the Miscellanies, Volume 3, which was the first volume of the Miscellanies. This was the history of the life of the late Mr. Jonathan Byle the Great. This novel is sometimes thought of as his masterpiece uh, because he almost certainly began composing it before he wrote Samela and Joseph Andrews. It is a satire of Walpole that draws a parallel between Walpole and Jonathan Byle, the infamous gang leader and highwayman. He implicitly compares the big party in Parliament with a gang of thieves being run by Walpole, whose constant desire to be a great man, a common epithet for Walpole, should culminate only in the antithesis of greatness, being hanged. Henry Fielding wrote The Roast Beef of Old England, which is used by both the Royal Navy and the United States Marine Corps in 1731. Richard Lowers later arranged it. This version is performed by the United States Navy Band. Is anonymously published The Female Husband, 1746, is a fictionalized account of a notorious case in which a female transvestite was tried for duping another woman into marriage. This was one of a number of small pamphlets and cost 6 pence at the time. Though a minor item in Fielding's total oeuvre, the subject is consistent with his ongoing preoccupation with friars, sham, and masks. His greatest work was Tom Jones, My Dear Friends, that is prescribed in our syllabus, that was published in 1749, a meticulously constructed precise novel telling the convoluted and hilarious tale of how a founding came into a fortune. Tom Jones. So far we were talking about Henry Fielding, the writer of Tom Jones. Now we would like to talk about Tom Jones. My dear friends, Tom Jones is a very, very famous novel written by, Henry Fielding. It's a celebrated novel. The history of Tom Jones, a founding, often known simply as Tom Jones, is a comic novel by the English playwright and novelist Henry Fielding. The novel is both a Bildegorous novel and a picaresque novel, were first published on 28 February 1749 in London. Tom Jones is among the earliest English prose works describable as a novel, and is the earliest novel mentioned by Somerset Maugham in 1948 book Great Novelists and Their Novels. Among the 10 best novels of the world, totaling 346,747 words. It is divided into 18 smaller books, each preceded by a discursive chapter, often on topics totally unrelated to the book itself. It is dedicated to George Littleton. Though lengthy, it is very lengthy, the novel is highly organized. S.T. Coleridge noted that it had one of the three great plots of all literature. S.T. Coleridge very clearly mentioned that it had, very important and very well knit kind of structure, and that is the very beauty of Tom Jones. It was received with enthusiasm by the general public of the time. Some critics, including Samuel Johnson, took exception to Fielding's robust distinctions between right and wrong. So as we were talking, my dear friends, initially in the introduction of Tom Jones, it was such a beautiful piece of writing by Henry Fielding that it was liked and appreciated by different critics also. So some of them actually appreciated its structure and the well-knit plot. Tom Jones is generally regarded as Fielding's greatest book. And there is no denying the fact that it is considered as a very important book by Fielding, and as a very influential English novel also. Tom Jones is a founding discovered on the property of a very kind, wealthy landowner, Squire Elworthy, in Somerset, in England's best country. So it is a story of a very kind and wealthy landowner, Squire Elworthy. And Tom grows into a vigorous and lusty yet honest and kind-hearted youth. He develops affection for his neighbor's daughter, Sophia Baston. On one hand, their love reflects the romantic comedy genre that was popular in 18th century Britain. However, Tom's status as a bastard causes Sophia's father and Allworthy to oppose their love. This criticism of class friction in society acted as a biting social commentary. So you see, actually, because he does not come from a right family, so and there was not much known about his birth, and also you see that kind of frictions were there. The inclusion of prostitution and sexual promiscuity in the plot was also original for its time and the foundation for criticism of the book's lowness. So, after discussing about Tom Jones, we would like to discuss about the themes in Tom Jones. The main theme of the novel is the contrast between Tom Jones' good nature, flawed but eventually corrected by his love for virtuous Sophia Baston, and his half-brother Wilfil's hypocrisy. Secondary themes include several other examples of virtue, especially that of Squire Elworthy, hypocrisy, especially that of Thackum, and just Bellany, for example, Mrs. Baston Northron. Sometimes tempered by repentance, for instance, Squire Mrs. Waters Jones. Both introductory chapters to each book and interspersed commentary introduce a long line of further themes. For instance, introductory chapters dwell extensively on bad writers and critics, quite unrelated to the plot but apologetic to the author and the novel itself, and authorial commentary on several characters shows strong opposition to Methodism, calling it fanatical, heretical, and implying association of hypocrites, such as the younger Wilfil with it. The novel takes place against the historical backdrop of the 45. Characters take different sides in the rebellion, which was an attempt to restore Roman Catholicism as the established religion of England and to under the Glorious Revolution. At one point, Sophia Baston is even mistaken for Jenny Cameron, the supposed lover of Bonnie Prince Charles. Good-natured characters are often modestly loyalist and Anglican, even Hanoverian, while ill-natured characters, Mrs. Baston, are only mistaken ones, Partridge, can be Jacobites, or like Squire Baston, just anti-Hanoverians. So, you see, the characters also are very good, and they are divided into some categories in the novel. Now, actually, we would like to understand the important list of characters, and what they are, how they behave actually, and how they are, what are their roles. So, the main important character in the novel is Tom Jones. Tom Jones was actually bastard, and he, the bard of Squire Elworthy, eventually revealed his nephew and the son of a long-deceased parson's son, Mr. Summers. Squire Elworthy, a wealthy squire with an estate in Somerset, of inapproachable character and good nature, eventually revealed to having unknowingly been Tom Jones' uncle. Mrs. Bridget Elworthy, Wilfil, Squire Elworthy's sister, Tom Jones' real mother, Captain John Wilfil, captain in the army and Bridget Elworthy's husband, with Methodist tendencies, Master Wilfil, son of Captain Wilfil and Bridget, a hypocrite and Tom Jones' foe, Benjamin Partridge, a teacher, later barber surgeon, erroneously suspected to be Tom Jones' father due to the extreme ill nature of his first wife, Mrs. Jenny Jones Waters, Partridge's servant, a very intelligent woman who is used by Mrs. Allworthy Wilfil to deflect suspicions on Tom Jones' maternity from herself. Black George Seagram, gamekeeper to Squire Elworthy's later Squire Baston, recipient of many benefits from Tom Jones, but eventually betraying him in an hour of need. Molly Seagram, black George's second daughter, Tom Jones' first lover, and having a bastard possibly by him. Mr. Thackum, revered school teacher to Tom and Master Blifil, a hypocrite who hates Tom Jones, favors Master Blifil, and conspires with the latter against the former. Mr. Square, philosopher, school teacher to Tom and Master Blifil, also a hypocrite who hates Jones and favors Blifil, but who refrains from conspiration and eventually repents. Square Baston, hunter, Baldy Square, who owns neighboring estate to Squire Elworthy, a simpleton who wants to marry his daughter Sophia to Squire Elworthy's heir. First Blifil and then Jones, against her will, with quite violent if not physical means. Sophia Baston, the Squire's only daughter, the model of virtue, beauty, and all good qualities. So she is a very good person and she is a very good example of beauty and all good qualities, my dear friends. Honor, Sophia's maid, egotistical and inconstant to her employer, Mrs. Harriet Fitzpatrick, bard of Mrs. Baston and wife of Fitzpatrick, an Irishman, abused by him, a cousin and friend of Sophia, but lacking her virtue. Miss Baston, the squire's unmarried sister, who wrongly believes herself to know the world both in international and national politics and in social mores, tries to impose Blifil to Sophia, but with less violent means than her brothers. Mr. Doling, a lawyer, Lady Bellastone, Tom's lover and a leading figure in London society, who tries to force Sophia into marriage to a lord by having her raped by him, so she would have Jones to herself. So these are also honor Mrs. Harriet Fitzpatrick, Miss Baston, Mr. Doling, Lady Bellastone. They are also important characters in the novel. Now, Mr. Nightingale. Mr. Nightingale is a young gentleman of leisure who is saved from ruining his first true love by John's entreaties. So he is a young gentleman. Lord Philamer, a peer and socialite who unsuccessfully conspires with Lady Bellastone to rape Sophia so as to force her into marriage. He is a peer and a socialite person who conspires with Lady Bellastone to rape Sophia so as to force her into marriage. Mrs. Miller and her two daughters, Nancy, later Mrs. Nightingale, a good-natured girl who is imposed on by Mr. Nightingale and would be ruined by him, together with her family by lack of constancy in virtue, and pre-adolescent Betty. Mr. Summer, son of a clergyman and revealed to be the father of Tom Jones. So he, as a matter of fact, Mr. Summer was a son of a clergyman, and later on it was revealed that he was the father of Tom Jones. So these were the important characters, my dear friends, and you see the plot is well knit, that you see characters are also try to do justice with the plot. And characters are also very much important as far as Tom Jones is concerned. Now we would like to discuss about the real plot, what it is. The distinguished country gentleman Allworthy, who lives in Somersetshire with his unmarried sister Bridget Allworthy, arrives home from a trip to London to discover a baby boy in a bat. Allworthy undertakes to uncover the mother and father of this foundling and finds local woman Jenny Jones and her tutor Mr. Patras guilty. Allworthy sends Jenny away from the country, and the poverty-stricken Patras leaves of his own accord. In spite of the criticism of the parish, Allworthy decides to bring up the boy. Soon after, Bridget marries Captain Blifil, a visitor at Allworthy's estate, and gives birth to a son of her own, named Blifil. Captain Blifil regards Tom Jones with jealousy, since he besieged his son to inherit all of Allworthy's possessions. This is a very important point, my dear friends. Captain Blifil regards Tom Jones with jealousy, since he besieged his son to inherit all of Allworthy's possessions. While mediating on money matters, Captain Blifil falls dead of an apoplexy. The narrator skips forward 12 years. Blifil and Tom Jones have been brought up together, but receive vastly different treatment from the other members of the household. They have been brought up, Blifil and Tom Jones, they have been brought up together, but they get a different kind of treatment from their family members even. Allworthy is the only person who shows consistent affection for Tom. The philosopher Square and the Reverend Thackum, the boy's tutors, despise Tom and adore Blifil, since Tom is mild and Blifil is pious. So you see, there was the only person, Allworthy, who used to give some kind of respect and some kind of, you see, kind of good behavior towards Tom Jones. Otherwise, people did not like him. Tom frequently steals apples and ducks to support the family of Black George, one of Allworthy's servants. Tom tells all of his secrets to Blifil, who then relates these to Thackum or Allworthy, thereby getting Tom into trouble. The people of the parish, hearing of Tom's generosity to Black George, begin to speak kindly of Tom while condemning Blifil for his sneakiness. Tom spends much time with the Squire Baston. Allworthy is never, since the Squire is impressed by Tom's sportsmanship. Tom spends a lot of time with Squire Baston actually. Sophia Baston, Squire Baston's daughter, falls deeply in love with Tom. Tom has already bestowed his affection on Molly Seagrim, the poor but feisty daughter of Black George. When Molly becomes pregnant, Tom prevents Allworthy from sending Molly to prison by admitting that he has fathered her child. Tom, at first oblivious to Sophia's charms and beauty, falls deeply in love with her and begins to resent his ties to Molly, yet he remains with Molly out of honor. Tom's commitment to Molly ends when he discovers that she has been having affairs, which means Tom is not the father of her child, and frees him to confess his feelings to Sophia. Allworthy falls gravely ill and summons his family and friends to be near him. He reads out his will, which states that Blifil will inherit most of his estate, although Tom is also provided for. Thackum and Square are upset that they are each promised only £1,000. Tom experiences great emotion at Allworthy's illness and barely leaves his bedside. A lawyer named Doling arrives and announces the sudden and unexpected death of Bridget Allworthy. When the doctor announces that Allworthy will not die, Tom rejoices and gets drunk on both joy and alcohol. Blifil calls Tom a bastard, and Tom retaliates by hitting him. Tom, after swearing eternal constancy to Sophia, encounters Molly by chance and makes love to her. Mrs. Baston, the aunt with whom Sophia spent much of her youth, comes to stay at her brother's house. She and the Squire fight constantly. Mrs. Baston, who was actually the aunt with whom Sophia spent much of her youth, she also comes there to stay at her brother's house. She and the Squire fight constantly, but they unite over Mrs. Baston's plan to marry Sophia to Blifil. Mrs. Baston promises not to reveal Sophia's love for Tom as long as Sophia submits to receiving Blifil as a suitor. Blifil thus begins his courtship of Sophia and brags so much about his progress that Allworthy believes that Sophia must love Blifil. Sophia, however, strongly opposes the proposal, and Squire Baston grows violent with her. Bilfil tells Allworthy that Tom is a rascal who cavorted drunkenly about the house, and Allworthy banishes Tom from the country. Tom does not want to leave Sophia, but decides that he must follow the honorable path. Tom begins to wander about the countryside because, you see, he was in deep love with Sophia, and he never wanted to leave the place, but because there had to be some kind of honorable path, that is why he had to choose. Because, you see, people were against him and they started opposing him, and people were criticizing him also. So he had to choose some honorable path. He had to choose some path at least. So that is why actually, after his expulsion from there, he began to wander in the countryside in Bristol. He happens to meet up with Partridge, who becomes his loyal servant. Tom also rescues a Mrs. Waters from being robbed, and they begin an affair at a local inn. Sophia, who has run away from Squire Baston's estate to avoid marrying Bilfil, stops at this inn and discovers that Tom is having an affair with Mrs. Waters. She leaves her muff in Tom's bed so that he knows she has been there. When Tom finds the muff, he frenetically sets out in pursuit of Sophia. The Irishman Fitzpatrick arrives at the inn searching for his wife, and arrives searching for Sophia. On the way to London, Sophia rides with her cousin Harriet, who is also Fitzpatrick's wife. In London, Sophia stays with her lady relative, Lady Ballaston. Tom and Partridge arrive in London soon after, and they stay in the house of Mrs. Miller and her daughters, one of whom is named Nancy. One of them is Nancy. A young gentleman called Nightingale also inhabits the house, and Tom soon realizes that he and Nancy are in love. Nancy falls pregnant, and Tom convinces Nightingale to marry her. Lady Ballaston and Tom begin an affair, although Tom privately continues to pursue Sophia. When he and Sophia are reconciled, Tom breaks off the relationship with Lady Ballaston by sending her a marriage proposal that scares her away. Yet, Lady Ballaston is still determined not to allow Sophia and Tom's love to flourish. She encourages another young man, Lord Falmer, to rape Sophia because Lady Ballaston was very much in love with Tom Jones. That is why she actually never wanted to Sophia and Tom's love to flourish actually. So that is why she decided that she had to do something, and in order to do something actually she encouraged another young man, Lord Falmer, to rape Sophia. Soon after, Squire Baston, Mrs. Baston, Bilfil and Allworthy arrive in London, and Squire Baston locks Sophia in her bedroom. Mr. Fitzpatrick thinks Tom is his wife's lover and begins a duel with Tom. In defending himself, Tom stabs Fitzpatrick with his sword and is thrown into jail. Partridge visits Tom in jail with the ghastly news that Mrs. Waters is Jenny Jones, Tom's mother. And Mrs. Waters meets with Allworthy and explains that Fitzpatrick is still alive and has admitted to initiating the duel. She also tells Allworthy that a lawyer acting on behalf of an unnamed gentleman tried to persuade her to conspire against Tom. Allworthy realizes that Bilfil is this very gentleman, and he decides never to speak to him again. Tom, however, takes pity on Bilfil and provides him with an annuity. Mrs. Waters also reveals that Tom's mother was Bridget Allworthy. Squire sends Allworthy a letter explaining that Tom's conduct during Allworthy's illness was honorable and compassionate. Tom is released from jail, and he and Allworthy are reunited as nephew and uncle. Mrs. Miller explains to Sophia the reasons for Tom's marriage proposal to Lady Ballaston, and Sophia is satisfied. Now that Tom is Allworthy's heir, Squire Baston eagerly encourages the marriage between Tom and Sophia. Sophia chastises Tom for his lack of chastity, but agrees to marry him. They live happily on Baston's estate with 2 children and soar everyone around them with kindness and generosity. So this was what the plot, my dear friends. Hope you have enjoyed Fielding's this Will Tom Jones. Thank you.